Hey guys, welcome back to JoeMcCom channel. You're here and ready to watch the intro Infinity tutorial, Batrep. First off, let's talk about some things you're going to want to have for the game. I would highly suggest, although this isn't required, I would still highly suggest getting some Infinity templates. Having the translucent template is just a great way to make sure that you know whether or not you're hitting models. The other thing you're going to want outside of the armies that you have are some 20-sided dice. I would say probably at least 4. And for this tutorial, the Ariadne are going to roll only white and blue 20-sided dice just to make things a little bit easier. And the Yujing are going to roll dice that have either an orange or red tint to it. When two people come to play a game of Infinity, neither side lets each other know what the models are. So Ariadne doesn't know what Yujing's bringing, Yujing doesn't know what Ariadne's bringing. They only know that they're agreeing on a particular point total game. So both teams, without identifying who their lieutenant is, will tell each other what the willpower of their lieutenant is. In the Ariadne faction, their willpower is a 13. In the Yujing, their willpower is 13 as well. And they do a face-to-face roll-off in order to determine who goes first and who deploys first. Let's go ahead and start that roll. Remember, white and blue dice will be Ariadne, red and reddish colored dice will be Yujing. Both sides roll. And we see that Ariadne rolled a 15 and Yujing rolled a 6. The 15 is over the willpower skill of the lieutenant, so it effectively didn't pass. And since the Yujing was able to get a dice roll under their willpower score, they either get to decide who will go first or who will deploy first. Really, in the game of Infinity, there's really only 2 choices. You either decide to go first or deploy second. Any other choice means that you're letting your opponent know where you're going to deploy and allowing him to go first and map directly against your models. The Yujing player, having won the willpower roll-off, is going to decide to go first. The Ariadne player is going to decide to deploy second. Now, just because they deploy second, they still get to decide which side of the board they want to deploy from. They happen to like how the terrain is set up on this side, so they will stay over here and deploy from here. So the Yujing player, because Ariadne is deploying second, must deploy first and on this side of the board. So with these 6 models that he has available to him, he can choose a model to leave in reserve. For this tutorial, we're just going to, because I want to demonstrate this, we're going to leave the Celestial Guard in reserve. Deployment zone is 12 inches from your table edge, which I've kind of marked out with this ruler. And we're going to take the rest of these models and we're going to go ahead and deploy. Now, as the Yujing player, I know that I'm going first. So I don't want to put my guys way far in the back if my intention is to rush them forward. For instance, with the Dumero Butai, since his main weapon is really a chain rifle which can only fire this far away, him sitting in the back is kind of a worthless idea. So we're going to go ahead and take this model. We want to make sure that the model is still hidden because we don't want him to take fire the second he moves. So we're going to go ahead and put the Dumero Butai right there. By putting the Dumero Butai here, we kind of shield him from direct fire. And so if Ariadne lines up a lot of guys shooting in this direction, he can take his orders and move in the opposite. Our Zanshi lieutenant is going to be someone that we want to kind of keep safe. We're going to go ahead and deploy the Zanshi lieutenant here. Now, as you continue to play games, you may find that putting your lieutenant in a precarious position might confuse your opponent to thinking it's not your lieutenant. But for an intro game, keep him hidden. We're going to take another Zanshi to guard this flank on the lieutenant. We're going to take another Zanshi, put him here, but also make the model prone. So when a model is prone, its height is only as high as its base. So it's incredibly flat. It would not be able to see over that wall. We're going to go ahead and use this prone marker, put it right next to the model to remind ourselves that he's prone. These markers are literally just put on 28mm bases and they come on the flaps of boxes that you purchase of the models themselves. So Corvus Belli, the maker of Infinity, provides you with some markers every time you purchase a box of miniatures. The Zanchi Invincible we're going to place right here, again, knowing that that's the 12-inch mark of deployment. It's right at the edge. We would have liked him to be right here, but this again allows him to get into the action pretty quickly. And knowing that this model is in reserve, the Yujing is done with deploying. Now it's Ariadna's turn to deploy. The Yujing player did not even have to tell us that he left anything in reserve. But for an intro game, if you're playing with your buddies, let each other know. When you're deploying second, it's really important to know exactly where your opponent has lined up his models, because it may impact where you want to deploy. Knowing that, they're going to go ahead and deploy primarily in this corner. And again, just to keep their arrows in sync with one another and be able to potentially pull off multiple arrows should a Yujing model rush forward. Starting with the Lieutenant, which we will leave on this level of the building. It's the second level of the building, but we want to really keep her safe, so we're going to go ahead and mark her as prone. We then take the other two line Kazakhs and, given our 12-inch deployment range, we go ahead and line up so that they're protecting one another. We then take the Highlander Grey model, placing him right here. Our Camouflage model, which can be deployed up to the midpoint of the table, will be placed right here. And now Ariadna has finished deploying. They still have a model in reserve, which is the Veteran Kazakh. So now Yujing must deploy their reserve models, if they have any left. In our case, they do. So the Yujing player has seen that the Ariadna player has placed all his models on more or less this side of their deployment zone, and wanting to get the Celestial Guard with a Spitfire into action as soon as possible, we'll deploy... The Yujing player will deploy the Celestial Guard right here. Having seen where the Yujing player placed their last reserve model, the Ariadna player has decided to, again, kind of consolidate where his models are and places his Veteran Kazakh right here at the edge, using this area right here as cover and hoping to stop any advancement of the Yujing force. So now it's the start of the game. Yujing turn 1, and we're going to count up our regular orders. Each one of the models on the table is a regular troop as defined in the army list, so we get an order for each one. Just to make the orders a little more legible as we're playing the game, we're going to put the orders up on the high ground. Because there's not a loss of lieutenant situation, you also have an extra order which can only be used by the lieutenant. Or most of the games that I've played, no one actually leaves a marker for the lieutenant order, but simply declares each time they're using an order. So if your opponent is paying attention to how many times you declare, I am using an order 2, then he'll know whether or not you've used your lieutenant order or not. So if your opponent has used more orders than they have on the table and no one happens to be impetuous, more than likely the lieutenant order has been used, and you can use that to help determine exactly where the lieutenant is. He goes and spends an order. The first thing that he's going to do is navigate his Celestial Guard in a way to get into optimal firing position. So the Celestial Guard moves 4 inches. Now the Ariadna player needs to see from the view of each one of the models if during that movement the Celestial Guard was in view. In this case, the answer is no. So the Yujing player continues his movement. I'm not spending a second order to move this second half. Movement is a short skill, and for every order you can either perform one long skill or two short skills. The second movement for the Celestial Guard is again a 4. So the Celestial Guard player moves there. We now take a second order, and the Celestial Guard is going to move around the corner 4 inches underneath the bridge. Again, it is important for the Ariadne player to determine if the model has come into line of sight with any models. At this point, the answer is no. The Celestial Guard continues using the second part of his order, which allows him to move his model right there. At each time a model is moved, the opposing player needs to check to make sure they cannot respond by either dodging and getting out of the way or firing at the model. The Eugene player uses his third order. Again, he's going to move his Celestial Guard. First short skill. This model almost can have line of sight to that model, but not quite. This wall is blocking his view of the Celestial Guard. No other models can see it, so he again utilizes the second half of his order. As you move, make sure that you are facing the model in the correct direction. Field of vision is only 180 degrees to the front of the model. Eugene player moves up. At this point, the Ariadne player can still not see the Eugene player. However, the Celestial Guard will choose to forego the second part of his order, because if a model is at the conclusion of its order, so uses the second part of his order to move into line of fire from an opposing model, he cannot fire back, and the opposing model gets a free shot at the player's model. Eugene player decides to use his fifth order again to move the Celestial Guard. This time he won't move a full 4 inches. He wants to utilize cover from the side wall, and he will be firing upon the Ariadne player. The distance of the model, or the distance that it's firing, you measure from the center of the base of the model that's firing to the center of the base of the model that it is firing upon. In this case, it's 6.5 inches. So the Celestial Guard's base BS is an 11. The Spitfire, when it is firing at 6.5 inches, gives him a +3. But the opponent that he's firing upon is behind cover, so he takes a -3 modifier, negating the range bonus on the Spitfire. So the Celestial Guard is now firing, looking for numbers of 11 or less, but a Spitfire gets to fire 4 times. The Kazakh, a rifle gets no modifier at 6.5 inches, and since the Celestial Guard is behind cover as well, the Line Kazakh must fire at a -3. So the Line Kazakh gets 1 roll at an 8 or less, and the Celestial Guard gets 4 rolls at 11 or less. One other thing happens at the same time that this combat is going on, and that is because the Celestial Guard has gotten within 8 inches of this model, that it can choose to turn its position. So he is going to face in this direction. So let's go ahead and roll out the combat. Again, the Celestial Guard has 4 dice, and looking for 11s. The Line Kazakh is looking for an 8. So in this case, the way the dice roll out, the Eugene player rolled a 17, 19, 13, and a 7. Only the 7 would hit. The Line Kazakh firing back rolls a 16 though, and that's too high to hit the Celestial Guard. So the Line Kazakh must take 1 armor save. The strength of the Spitfire is a 14. The Line Kazakh has 1 armor, but he also gets 3 an additional modifier of armor from cover of +3. So, knowing that he has to beat the number 14, and starting with 4, he needs to roll an 11 or higher in order to not take a wound. Let's find out what happens. He rolls an 18, and the Lion Kazakh survives.